Okay, right. My name is Houlson. I'm an environmental scientist, and I've come to share my perspective on water and purification. My title is a play on the word water and whether we can create it as a sacred water or water that's scared. And the letter C is the word that is changing. The letter C is the letter that's changing everything. So let's say how we see it is whether we see it as scared or sacred water. As we know, a human body is about 70% water. It's about 70% of the surface of the planet as well. So semiotically, it represents a whole area of different people. It could be energy for power generation, it could be nourishment, drinking water, it could be a spiritual element as spiritual practice, it could be a disposal media. But there's more to water than meets the eye. I'd like to cover in my talk a focus of water on the topic of the mind and water, spirit and water, and come to some kind of conclusion. I've added in a small video that I made in the month since I presented a similar talk. It gives a bit more science grounding on what I'm talking about, plus a few more extra pieces of science so it's not too abstract. My background is that I'm a water scientist. I've worked in drinking water, arsenic in Bangladesh, drinking water for 7 years. Also mercury as a lead scientist for Environment Canada on mercury removal for an Environment Canada project. So my practice is real science with water. I also have a passion for personal development though. So how I define that is basically the mind, the body, and let's say the soul, and making them more, let's say, healthy. So the talk kind of combines all of that together with a semiotic focus as well. I just want to also set a bit of a scope so it gives you a sense of context of where it's going. I'm not going to talk about conservation of water. It's important, but it's not covered because it's too big a topic. I'm just going to talk about purification of water. I'm going to talk about a controversial topic a little bit called homeopathy. And I know some people think it's rubbish, but I'm going to mention a little bit because it's relevant. I'm also going to talk about a Native American tradition called sweat lodge. And I know there's some processes involving sweat lodge which involve fire. So I'm just going to talk about the water aspect, so it doesn't cover the fire aspect of sweat lodge. So, as we know, water is a key part of physical health. With dehydration, you can't survive. It flushes out waste. And you also want to avoid contaminated water so you don't hurt yourself. So in a very similar way, nature has the same requirements as human body. In Indian science of Ayurveda, the process of using warm water is a very healthy process of simple warm water helping remove ama or toxins in the body. And cold water apparently helps, in fact puts out the fire, the digestive fire in the human body. So on the physical health level alone, water is key for health. What about mental health though? I'm sure we all relax in the shower, relax in the bath, relax on the beach. So we know that it affects our mental health whether we're in water or not in water. I'm sure we've also heard about people with mercury poisoning. The Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland apparently had mercury poisoning, which created his mental health issues. Also know that lead, aluminium also have mental health issues, and they are water contaminants. Thanks. As Ellen mentioned, fluoride is a water contaminant, but it also causes mental health issues, IQ reduction in children, for example. And it also pulls lead out of pipes. So again, it's a mental health issue, just from water alone. On the topic of spiritual health, numerous religions and cultures involve water in their daily processes or part of their processes of spiritual health. This year in India, the Mahakumbh Mela was a specific Hindu tradition which focuses on worship of the goddess Ganga in the river Ganges. In Judaism, there's a process called mikvah. In Islam, ghusl, and Christianity, there's baptism. And if you're a non-denominational person, maybe there's some spiritual teachers that might be of interest, such as John of God, who blesses water that you can drink as well. So I'm not going to talk about the actual physical purification of water, like Brita filters and other areas like that, because that's fairly common knowledge. I want to talk about the more controversial, therefore more interesting areas, basically the mind and water and spirit and water. And I mentioned this before, but I think it's really a crucial topic here because it covers another topic of memetics mainly, which is the mental health of people is really stigmatized in society. If you have a mental health issue, like I've mentioned it before, it's unlikely you're going to come to say to your boss, I can't make it today, I'm seeing my psychiatrist. That's not going to happen in work, because then you're going to be stigmatized. Why do I say this? Because in the field of water science, or at least water and health, the topic of homeopathy, if someone says the water body here, a water cup contains homeopathic water that has an effect on your mental health, again, there's almost a stigma to say there's some memory in the water. I'm not saying that there is or there isn't, but the focus here that notice the similarity. There's a stigma between mental health of a human being and then, let's say, the mental health of water, because memory of water. So my interest, therefore, is ways to clear the physical health of water, which is what I do professionally anyway, but also the mental health and spiritual health of water, however you define that. So this is a process that isn't new. If you look back into history, thousands of years, you can see that people have talked about water and physical, mental, and spiritual health. Why am I interested in this? Well, when my parents got divorced when I was 9 years old, I had really strong memories of their arguments, for example. And no, they're not fighting, but the memories of the experience definitely is a trauma that you can recall. And similarly to water, potentially, is there a way that, despite taking the water away from something where there's a traumatic experience, the water can retain the memory, just like a human being taken away from a trauma can experience and remember the event without actually having that physical presence in the water. Interestingly, the process of homeopathy involves this process where you have a water body and you have a material that you want the water to entrain the information in. It actually involves shocking the water in a process called succussion, which is shaking the water violently next to the substance, and then it creates, according to homeopaths, a memory of the event, and that memory event is what creates a homeopathic remedy, basically a shock next to the substance of interest. So again, there's a similarity between a human life and an event that you could remember, even though the event isn't occurring, and then that being a memory, such as the divorce, for example, or a water body carrying the memory of a substance, that it was the succussing the water and then carrying the memory again. Even though in both cases there's no physical remnant of either experience. Another person that I met when I was around about 10 or 11 years old was a person who was connected to the Hopi First Nations in, I believe it's one of the southwestern states of America. She explained to me some of the non-verbal communication methods of the Hopi Indians, or at least described some of their interests in non-verbal communication. And I mention that because some of the topic of water involves water and its memory, which isn't something that I'm talking about as I've just made up. It's a tradition in Native American culture that's gone back quite a lot of time. I actually want to mention this because by chance I picked up a brochure from a local First Nations written article, and I just want to mention here that this is an Ontario First Nations quote. you won't be able to see it, but it says, water is the source of life. Water is a sacred gift from the Creator to heal and sustain all living beings. Water is alive and is life itself. So this is just something that was written winter 2013 from First Nations about water and its, let's say, life and memory. So that's not me saying it, that's First Nations. So moving on, about 20 years after my parents got divorced, I noticed another topic which brings this in a bit more context on the science topic. I was doing a PhD in environmental engineering. One of my colleagues was looking at the research of how magnets affect water, basically crystals, magnets affecting crystals. It's funded by a huge multinational that I'm sure we all know, and she actually got her PhD to study how do magnets affect water. Now it sounds, again, fluffy science, but it isn't. There's a patent on it by this big company, and she got her PhD out of it. Basically, can water crystals be formed in the presence of magnets? Why do I mention this? Well, as we all know, we all have magnetic fields. We have a brain, which is an electromagnetic field generator. We have a heart, which is an electromagnetic field generator. And the level of magnetic fields aren't exactly very strong. But I went to the U of T recently to actually study this at the research lab there, and this is what the video I'm going to quickly show you is. So that's U of T campus in Scarborough. And I have a specific research lab there where you can get brain waves measured. And this is basically a map of where they put electrodes in your head.
Yeah.
And these, it's a quick video, but it will show you just an idea of the electrical signals that you can pick up when you do an electroencephalogram, which is a brainwave study. This is an actual physical movement of the body, another physical movement. So every thought, every word, every deed creates an electromagnetic field, basically. Because if you're connecting electrodes on the outside of the body, you're not actually measuring it in your brain, you're measuring it external to your brain, which means electromagnetic fields exit your brain, which is relevant to this topic of water. This is just the TA talking as she is connecting the electrodes up. Different movements, different thoughts, different words, different actions create different electromagnetic fields, and like Houlson, really thick lines, and you get a field which is dependent on what your body is doing, what you're thinking, or what you're saying. So these lines are basically a collection of brainwaves, basically delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma, which are brain processes. You have really slow wave forms with delta, and this is like maybe if you're moving a body part, maybe if you're meditating, you're going to get a different brainwave pattern. So this is just to show that brain waves are measurable outside of the human body. So that gives you a bit of context on electromagnetic fields. So this is maybe a movement of the jaw. You get a different brain wave for the thought. So thoughts, words, deeds affect things outside of your brain. So I thought I'd show you that. That was a video that I decided it would be useful to make at U of T in Scarborough. So I'll finish. So that's brainwaves, electroencephalograms, that's an electroencephalogram. You also know from heart monitoring you can study the electromagnetic field from the heart. More powerful field, but again, both the brain and the heart are electromagnetic field generators, which ties into the topic of water by magnets, which is what I was studying at university, or at least one of my colleagues was. Interesting is an organization in the US called HeartMath, which actually does Fourier transform analysis, which is a mathematical analysis of heartbeats. So this is brain waves, but they study heartbeats and they do a Fourier transform, which is a mathematical analysis, to look at the variability in the heartbeat and to see, it's almost a fingerprint of emotion. So maybe if you're in a happy, positive state, you have a mathematically reproducible heartbeat, which will come up as more of a smooth curve, whilst if you're in a more agitated, frustrated state of mind, it will come up as more jagged. So again, the electromagnetic field of the body, or at least the heartbeat, is something that has a specific signal based on your mood. You can actually buy an M-wave system which connects up to your body, and you can measure it specifically yourself. So anybody can actually do that. So it's not the actual beats per minute measurement, it's something mathematically analysed in the heartbeat spectrum itself, which is what the HeartMath program does. Why is this relevant? Because we have the topic of memes, which are apparently the cultural viruses of the mind, so ideas that get passed around society. So one of my ideas possibly was that, maybe not even my idea, is that our memes transferred in water, because clearly water is affected by magnets. We're able to transmit electromagnetic fields. As you've seen from my brain waves, specific electromagnetic fields come out from specific activities, so there's no reason why it's at least not a theory to look into a bit more. In fact, a professor in Germany, or a PhD scientist, Wolfgang Ludwig, has studied the effect of water and how it gets affected by different materials placed in close contact to it, such as looking at a certain spectrum of ultraviolet. He was able to find in the 240 to 320 nanometer wavelength that water picks up what it's near. A little bit similar to the homeopathy theory, but it was able to detect, or at least hold the memory of being near to, for example, geomagnetic stress or products that are more toxic in nature. So he was able to detect that on an ultraviolet analysis of the water. He's also able to find out that healing water from places like Marion Springs, where St. Mary was apparently appearing, had another specific wavelength, or at least a measurable absorption of ultraviolet, apparently. One of the U of T graduates, who's now Professor Emeritus at Stanford Materials Science, apparently is someone called Dr. Bill Tiller. He was able to look at how experienced meditators were able to reproducibly change the pH of water with intention. So again, that's a PhD from University of Toronto, who's Professor Emeritus in Materials Science at Stanford. So it's not like a back of the kitchen kind of experiment. It's someone who's actually, in a mainstream university. Someone who's a bit more, let's say, citizen science focused is someone called Masaru Emoto, who looked at how when water had, for example, words written on a container, it was able to affect the crystal structure from freezing up to, let's say, less frozen water. So you can see the crystal structure, and able to photograph the images and then see how different words, different music was able to affect the water. Admittedly, it's not the science approach, but it's let's say, a citizen science where it's a demonstration of an effect. Interestingly though, when you look at a child's life, you can see that when you label a child, that has a clearly significant effect. You can tell a child that it's really intelligent and it will have an effect on its life in some way later on. But you can tell a child it's very stupid and bad and rotten, and that will have an effect. So clearly labeling, take the label away, there is an effect. So again, there's a similarity between the human experience and the water experience. In China, there's a process that I'm sure you've heard about called feng shui, which is in Chinese written as wind water. where the location of certain features in a building affect a person's life. And if you're a business person, I'm sure you'd consider feng shui, waterfalls, for example, as a possible way to enhance your success. In India, the process of building science called Vastu Sastra is a focus where you'd enhance positive energy in a building, maybe try to reduce the negative energy by placement, or at least locating different parts of your house in a certain location relating to a water body, for example. Like I mentioned, homeopathy. People might use homeopathy for self-confidence, for other issues that they find they want an effect from water. Maybe flower essences as well. People may have a specific flower essence that they could go to maybe a natural health shop and pick up a flower essence for another, maybe a small issue like self-confidence, for example. Or in homeopathy, for example, there's a jet lag formula where you could actually take it and it helps address the symptoms of jet lag. So clearly, we can both affect water and we can also be affected by water. So it's almost like a two-way process. And really it's a choice whether it's positive or negative. It could be physically, mentally or spiritually positive or negative. How far you go down that rabbit hole is really up to each one of us, because it's, like I mentioned, it's controversial, but these topics have been going around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So I'd just like to kind of finish on the mind aspect of water, that it's more of a passive effect. It doesn't seem to be active. It's like once the structure of water has been affected, it seems to be passive. It doesn't seem to have its own idea to say, no, I don't really like doing this, I'm going to change it. So I'm going to move on to the topic of the more active process with water, which is spiritual water, which seems to be more of a wisdom-based aspect of water, along the lines of what I talked about from this First Nation quote, which is saying water is alive, which implies it's more than just a structural change. It's something beyond just the structure of water has changed because it's been near something. That's why they put the word alive rather than water is structured, which is, I'd say, is a different concept. With water and spirit, one of the concepts is the drinking of water that has a spiritual healing property, and Anand mentioned to me in a talk that he did, or after the talk, that there's a well in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca, which Muslims like to drink from, and it's called Shumshum water, which is a sacred water to drink. There's also Abi Shifa healing water in Shia Islam. In India, there's the Tirtham water, which is a Hindu consecrated water, which again you drink. It's almost like an inner purification process. Water can also be used in the spiritual context for that external purification. In Hinduism, again, Abhishek is a process where you pour water over a statue. So in doing that, you'd also purify yourself, which is almost let's say, a quantum physics type approach, where you're not actually drinking the water, you're not actually touching the water, you're actually pouring it over a statue, and the statue is usually of a god or a deity. That results in an inner purification. And various shamans around the world, or at least one I know of in Hawaii, talks about using water that has been exposed to sunlight in a blue bottle and using that as a purification method. So again, an inner purification and an outer purification focus with water. Other spiritual teachers have talked about spiritual wishing wells dedicated, for example, by one Indian saint, for example. Another person mentioned how when you look on the outside of a church, you can see gargoyles. And his idea was that, his name is David Price Francis, was that the gargoyles attract the negative spirits to the gargoyles, which are ugly things on the side of the building. And the water just flushes those gargoyle bad energies out of the building. So again, it's a purification of the church. That's his theory. I mentioned also that these ideas have been around for thousands of years. 2,000 years ago, and mentioned in the Bible as well, as the the healing springs at Bethesda, where apparently the water was vibrating, and then if you got in at a certain time, you'd be healed of certain health conditions if you're the first person in the pool. Apparently, people will dip themselves in the Ganges, in the Kumbh Mela specifically, which is that process that occurs. Millions of people actually do that, but also in certain areas of the Ganges, people do prayers to the goddess Ganga in the river Ganges. In Canada, specifically, I know about First Nations that use sweat lodge purification, which is basically the focus of water externally, using hot stones, creating a really humid environment, and then using that steam as like a purification process in addition to prayer. And it's basically to try to take the body back to the body and spirit back to its purest form, as if it's just left its mother. So it's a purification process. The Cherokee Nation actually do this with a bit more detail, and it's called, well, I found it as more detailed because it had more description of what they did. And it's called going to the water, which is at sunrise, taking 4 dips in running water, and then that purifying you as well. And some of the sweat lodges, and I'm not saying all of them, but some of them, they actually ask for the water specifically to heal them. So when I mentioned one of these processes, the process of mind in water was more passive. It's not asking the water as a passive entity, it's asking it as an active entity to heal. So that's why I mentioned this in the spirit category, because First Nations are actually asking the water to heal it. It's not like water structured, it heals it. The person is asking, so it's a request, therefore it's implying a communication with the water. In different cultures around the world, gods of water are invoked as well, or at least they have been traditionally recognized. Sobek is the god of the Nile in the Ganges, in Egypt rather. And an interesting process in India, with the Hindu religion specifically, is making prasad food, which is when you're making the food, having some water in the hand and then placing it over your food, saying a mantra, and then drinking the water. So that purifies the food. Apparently the water purifies you as well. So it involves active communication with a deity, and then saying the mantra rather than just having a structured water. It's actual, you're asking for, or you're invoking the name of a deity, or you're using the sacred mantra to purify the food. And you can also offer the food silently to a god or deity, and that will also apparently get the blessings into the food, which, as you know, is mainly water anyway, or at least a lot of water in the food. That's Hindu religion. Going back to the Japanese, let's say, citizen science focus, was the Masaru effect, where he was studying water and its effect with words. He looked at the effect of chanting and prayer, which I'd say is a spiritual process rather than a mind process, because it does involve distant communication with either a deity or prayers for other people. He was also able to look under the microscope and find that the crystal structures with his, let's say, not completely peer-reviewed science method, but let's say citizen science method of images changing structure from maybe a more let's say messy crystal structure to something a bit more, let's say, beautiful, aesthetically pleasing. Chanting and prayers for gratitude, for example, seem to have a more specific effect. I wanted to bring in a bit of science on that one too, because people might think, well, that sounds really fluffy, but someone actually bothered to do some research on this, to do some distant intention crystal effects. And I just want to read the abstract, because if I give you just a few words, it won't give you the essence. Abstract. I'm going to read. Basically, the title is Double-Blind Test of the Effects of Distant Intention on Water Crystal Formation. So the few lines on the abstract. The hypothesis that water treated with intention can affect ice crystals formed from that water was pilot tested under double-blind conditions. A group of approximately 2,000 people in Tokyo focused positive intentions towards water samples located inside an electromagnetically shielded room in California. That group was unaware of similar water samples set aside in a different location as controls. Ice crystals formed from both sets of water samples, but blindly identified and photographed by an analyst, so it's a blind sample, or blind samples. And the resulting images were blindly assessed for aesthetic appeal by 100 independent judges. So you can see we have a lot of people involved in a lot of blind situations, so people don't know the outcome or don't know what's going on there. The results indicated the crystals from the treated water were given higher scores for aesthetic appeal than those from the control water, statistically significantly. Lending support it gives you a number of statistical significance, and it's one-tailed, lending support to the hypothesis. So the person who did the science was a PhD scientist called Dean Radin. He actually replicated a study that was already published in 2006, but he replicated it as a triple-blind study. And I say it again, I just want to read it out because it gives you a bit more context. So again, it's not just someone thinks the water looks nice, but is it somebody wants an experiment to work? Here's what the abstract is, published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration 2008. It's called Triple Blind Water Crystal Replication Study. An experiment tested the hypothesis that water exposed to distant intentions affects aesthetic rating of ice crystals from that water. Over 3 days, 1,900 people in Austria and Germany focused their intentions towards water samples located inside an electromagnetically shielded room in California. Water samples located near the target water but unknown to the people providing intentions acted as proximal controls. Other samples located outside the shielded room acted as distant controls. Just a few more sentences on this. Ice drops formed from samples of water in the different treatment conditions were photographed by a technician. Each image was assessed for aesthetic beauty by over 2,500 independent judges, and the resulting data were analysed, all by individuals blind with respect to the underlying treatment conditions. Results suggested that the crystal images in the intentionally treated condition were rated as aesthetically more beautiful than proximal control crystals. And again, they give a statistically significant number here. This outcome replicates the results of an earlier double-blind pilot test. So, maybe it's not as much science as you want, but it shows that under triple-blind conditions, the aesthetic appearance of water changes. And you might think, well, what does aesthetics have to do with science? Well, if you go to a test lab, you can ask for another non-chemical assessment. You can do odor assessment, for example, which basically involves a smell test for something. So again, it's maybe not completely hard science, but it's aesthetics, visual assessment in this case. Or if you go to a lab, you can do an odor assessment. It involves people doing a test with basically their nose. So that's a recognised way of non-laboratory analysis, or laboratory analysis, but maybe not in a test tube. So like I mentioned, in California, or at least in the US, the Institute of Heart Math are looking at the effect of measuring how heartbeat can give you an indication of a person's level of heart rate variability, whether you're in a coherent state of mind, whether you're feeling more peaceful and having the emotions of maybe love, compassion, gratitude, which affects your heartbeat, or whether you're in an incoherent condition such as anger and frustration, for example. So, with this in mind, it seems that we have an ability to affect water, whether it's from our heart, in a state of coherence, in a good mood, in a bad mood, which is incoherence. The effect of water that has been treated by intention shows structural changes. I've shown you the video above which shows that electromagnetic fields generated within the brain push electrons out into the electrodes which are outside of the head. And you can get a measurable effect, and you can see the patterns there. So basically every thought, every word, every deed, because when you saw those big chunks dynamics of brainwave activity. That was a movement, that wasn't necessarily a thought. So basically every thought, every word, every deed has an effect on something outside of us, not just inside our brain. I mentioned also that when I was at university, people were studying magnets and water, and that it affects crystals. Somebody got their PhD based on that, and also a company got their patent on that, and that's a huge company. So the dots join together. Depending on how strongly you want the dots to join together, there is something going on there. And it's not just recent research where people have identified these changes in water structure with acetics or with crystal changes or a pH change like I mentioned with Bill Tiller, or the measurable changes in heartbeat, heart rate variability from heart math, where you can see a different emotional condition gives you a different heartbeat, which is an electromagnetic field, as you know. When we do the electroencephalogram, electrocardiogram, which is a heartbeat measurement. I showed you the electroencephalograph, which shows that your brain is an electromagnetic field generator, or at least it shows that it's creating waves of basically neurons firing at the same time. So I'd like to also just mention that a commonality of, and I've read this in a book called Ethical Water, which is interesting. It's basically a quote here, and it says, a commonality of most or all indigenous traditional cultures is that they view the earth as a living entity comprised of spiritual beings in a multitude of forms, including plants, animals, rocks, air, and water. So that implies, similar to this quote that I got from this recently printed First Nations quote, that water has more than just the physical properties of is it healthy, is it drinkable. There's more maybe than just the structural properties of are the crystals maybe affected by a magnet. There's more of a consciousness aspect, which kind of takes it back to more how many years ago when in the Bible it was mentioned that water was able to heal people without it being drunk. Just the contact of the water in the Bethesda healing pool. And also the different religious traditions such as Hinduism, the Ganges water dips, the Cherokee First Nations, the Zimjum water, and Islam. So with all of these factors together, clearly we have a two-way process here where water can affect us. We can affect water on the physical level, contaminate it, we can purify it physically, mentally, and let's say spiritually. But this isn't just one country or one religion. It seems to be dotted around the world where people have noticed this as a commonality where really we have a choice with what we do with our mind, what we do with our thoughts, what we do with our words and our deeds. Because if we are generating electromagnetic fields constantly from our thoughts and our actions and our emotions, and that is measurable outside the body, clearly we have a choice of whether we choose to do things that are more positive for each other and the planet, or more negative. And whether we like it or not, it does seem to affect water. And I think the cultures that I'm mentioning here do seem to pick up on the fact that water is more than just a resource that we just dump rubbish in. It seems to have an ability to work. Like you said, it's alive, according to the First Nations quote I put here, so what I mentioned here. It seems that it's an interactive process. So when the title of the talk was Sacred or Scared, what I mentioned right at the beginning was how you see it, the letter C. It's really where you place the C. Is it scared? You place the C in one location, or sacred, you place it in another location. How you see water defines where you end up with it. It could be sacred water, it could be helping you purify on the mind, body, spirit level, or it could be water that you've contaminated maybe with anything, but it's really how you see it. So it's a choice that we all have to affect everything that we have in contact with, because if our mind, body and spirit are affecting water, which is what this information seems to show, we have a choice whether we choose to be a positive influence on the planet and the water, or a negative influence. So that's my talk. Thank you.
Thank you. There's some comments, questions?
Well, I think we have to replace after that the notion of aqua simplex by the notion of aqua complex. And I think it's very interesting and fascinating by what you do and what you say, because you reframe this concept of water, which we tend in the Enlightenment perspective as something inert, which is submitted only to gravity. Well, yes, but also it can go up through osmosis. So it is not. When you think of osmosis, it becomes a little more complex, and then you bring it all these dimension, which at first, because of my training, my education, I tend to reject as a crackpot ideas. But if you think of it, if you think twice, you say, well, maybe I am the crackpot. Maybe there is more to water than what you think, and definitely it's complex. It's exactly complex. The type of experiments you report, I tend to take it personally with a grain of salt, if you want. Yeah. But am I wrong or am I right? I think the jury is still out. And great ideas have come like that from we think influence water, but because we think of it, nonsense. Well, who knows? As you mentioned the other day, our brain is a lot of water, and so it's I think it's thought-provoking, stimulating, and it's always good to take a good shower of new ideas to get rid of what we take for granted. So that's all what I have to say quickly, but maybe there is other point of view. Yeah?
I need some more time to formulate.
To percolate.
Yes.
Of course, if you think of all the metaphors that water has provided us with.
That's exactly what I was thinking of.
But do you have any reaction?
I just hope they discover water in
Mars.
water, simple water on Mars.
So you can
If
go
we
away.
could ever reach that
So
stage,
you can retire there.
well, hopefully I'll look at it in a different perspective, maybe, and go up there and bathe for the rest of my life. I think it'll be. I was just saying, actually, apart from that, it would be a great discovery if we can reach that. They're working on it. It may take a long time before it's really brought to us.
Have you any information about that?
Water on Mars.
Yes, water in Mars.
I did come across this thing about a huge body of water in space in general. It's like a huge space cloud. I can get the information, but it's like a massive amount of water in space, which I didn't realise, but there's like a huge bodies of water in space that somehow has been discovered, but I can get that information. But yeah, it's like a huge cloud of water.
Yes.
On Mars. So I know that they have frozen caps, but I don't know whether it's carbon dioxide or water. But I know it's a white layer on top of one of the poles. There's like a white cap, but it might be carbon dioxide, so I'm not sure.
Well, in good we trust, and I hope they're doing well, and they can. Either way, it'll be a great exploring mission that they're heading for, and I dearly respect water. I understand it's part of our human nature and life. It's part of us. We can't live without it. Not too long ago, I was on a vacation, and I was bathing in so hot spring waters. The if you will, right from directly coming out abundance of it from the mountain, which it would be an old way of volcano, if you will, in Portugal, one of the islands, and it's recognized and known from many around the world that do go there for these purposes to bathe. I enjoy it. It does you good, and all of that. And of course, way back in the Romans, they had their hot springs and their saunas. It's healthy, supposedly. We all can. I never studied much, but these sort of way of old traditional that even an earring, perhaps a little hot water helps to soothe here and there, kind of thing. This is what I sort of know, and how much more there is to really believe, see, and experiment with.
I suppose that Julio would agree that after all, you bless water. You bless water, and you transform water when you bless water.
I think that's all
You see?
safe.
So you have many religious approach which indeed pretend to or maybe do something on water.
Can scared in your title? I didn't get the scared part. Was there?
Yeah, no, it's just a play on words. Like when I look back at the title, I thought I don't know how to include that, but it's really the topic of just like it's really more the concept of how you see it. It's like just it's the word. It's really just a play on words, how you see things, not really the scared sacred. That is like a little bit of the topic, but it's really the play on words on how you see things, and that's really the focus here, because you could really see it. You could see this is rubbish, or you could see it as useful. You could see it as useful to your life, or you could see it as just discardable information. So really, again, it's really the topic of how you see it, and it's like, again, how you see life. Can you see it as positive or negative? A bunch of information, half glass half full, glass half empty. It's the same general topic. So it's really the play on words. It's the reason why I chose that title. Not really a focus on scared or sacred, but it does a little bit cover up that topic. It's a play on words.
The first time I saw your title, I thought it was a typo. So
Yeah.
I corrected in scarce. Scarce was scarce water.
Yeah.
And then I realized that no, scared water. You shut at water. Water is scared. And so it brings life into water. So
I think anything I could say, I do fear, and I don't mean to make a pun here, but to be out of my depth. But from a point of view of psychology, specifically analytical psychology, water is always represented as the counterpart of emotion in a symbolic language. So there is certainly a long tradition of equating water with that which is capricious, movable. If you consider in classical mythology, Poseidon is always portrayed as being vengeful, wrathful, and in common parlance, we use metaphors of water all the time to speak about emotion. You know, he's a deep person. Still waters run deep, these kinds of things. Ideas of the stormy sea being angry. There's I don't want to make any claims about the physical world because I'm a linguist and we throw up our hands at things like that, but from a cognitive perspective, there's an association between water and emotion that seems to be fairly universal, at least within the societies that have a developed
close to water.
tradition. Yes,
In
exactly.
ecological.
Exactly. So
not in the Sahara, but
exactly. Context is again going to be extremely important.
I think you actually reminded me of an important topic on that, because I think going back to the topic of, it sounds like pretty heady stuff, but for me it's like the topic of is water really like a cure-all? So you just drink one bunch of holy water that's structured and it's perfectly pure, and then everything's perfect forever. I think the topic is, because it's kind of relating to what you're saying a little bit, I think, is that this is just like maybe another health topic. So, you drink one glass of water, it's healthy, doesn't mean to say everything's going to be right forever. And I guess I didn't really add that in, but I wanted to say that it's a topic of, it's just a piece of the pie. So one bit of water that's really purified, plus a really bad diet, bad exercise isn't going to do that much. So it's really the focus of like a holistic approach, and then even then, when you've got the water that's already been treated properly, it's like maybe got a blessing in it from some spiritual teacher that if you're religious, or if you do your sweat lodge, again, it wouldn't be like one per lifetime. It would be like an ongoing purification, an ongoing process, just like exercise, just like good diet, good nutrition. So be part of the pie, and then ongoing prevention and ongoing purification. So again, it's not really overstating how water has this benefit, or how we can influence water. It's almost like an ongoing interactive process. So I think somehow what you were saying kind of brought that up as a reminder to kind of put the context of this whole water topic with that kind of disclaimer to say that yes, it is important, but it's not like any more important. Well, it's part of the puzzle. It's just like a little part, when you've got your good mental health, your good physical health, which can have water in it that's treated or not. You could still drink unhealthy water and you can still probably have a good life, and it might add good stuff to do it. It might add good stuff to treat your water, but ongoing. So rather than just once and then everything else is okay forever, it's almost like continuously doing something with your water, but then also continuously trying to eat healthy and continuously trying to think positive or something. It's almost like a ongoing rather than just a one-stop, one quick, easy button thing. It's like it's ongoing. So I think somehow what you said has brought that important reminder up. Otherwise, this still seemed like the perfect one-pill solution to everything, and I don't think I'm trying to present it as that. It's more like an add-on to everything else that you're trying to do really healthy. And then even then, it'll be an ongoing process as well. And I've read an interesting quote by a spiritual person in India that mentioned that even when people do the holy dip in the Ganges, they say that it removes sins. But what this person wrote was that, yes, you go into the Ganges, it washes your sins away, but they're hiding behind the bush when you're ready to get out of the water, which means that, yes, it will take something away, but you have to kind of not rely on that forever. Otherwise, the sins that came off when you were in the Ganges are hiding behind the bush to come out and get you again. Meaning it's not going to be just like slate clean forever. It's making sure it's an ongoing purification process. So thanks for bringing what you said up, because that could trigger that as a...
Well, I hope that my only hope is to trigger something. It's sort of, I come at it as a layman, because it's not my discipline, but what you said triggered those notions of water as a cultural object, and water as an object of use in metaphor. And then if that can trigger something, then I'm glad to do so.
I wonder if anybody knows the book by Ivan Illich, H2O, which is about water. Do you know? Because Ivan Illich is a Catholic thinker. He came to Toronto. I had met him years ago. Yes. And it's about water from Ivan Illich's point of view. Certainly really interesting. The discourse on water is another semiotic topic.
Well, see, generally speaking, water is water. It is what it is, and it's one of the 2 or 3 elements in life that are very important.
You cannot do without it.
As human beings, as species, we cannot do without. It is an amazing, I don't have all the words, but to say, to believe, believers or not, either way, it's there. What they make of it, or they try to bring about discovering from it. At this point in stage, I think we should have really. If the ancient times introduced and taught certain ways of using and going about that it is good for you. And like a nice wave in an ocean. If an ocean settled, all you see is just sad water, sort of. But when the waves start to come about and turn, and it's an amazing thing as well. It's just like a cotton ball, just beautiful. And the mixture of salt and so on and so forth. There's some health part of reasoning what an ocean water is good for.
So now you are
And many things. I wish I could.
of our stimulating circle path.
I haven't studied much in my times, and to say that I could, but
But you
I
don't
love.
have to study to understand things.
True, but I do respect and I enjoy.